for many years, if you did a search on professional hairstyles for work, you would get almost exclusively in Google Images white women with ponytails and updos. And if you Googled unprofessional hairstyles for work, it was almost exclusively Black women with natural hair.
Welcome to At Liberty, a weekly show where we go deep on the civil rights and civil liberties questions of our time. I'm Molly Kaplan, ACLU Multimedia Director and your host. This week, I'm talking to UCLA professor and best-selling author Dr. Safiya Noble about what's wrong with Google search, aka the problem of algorithmic discrimination. Dr. Noble, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Molly, for having me. Excited to be here.
In your book, Algorithms of Oppression, you talk about a really pivotal moment that led you to this work. And as I understand, you were trying to find ways to keep your preteen stepdaughter and her cousins entertained. And you did a quick Google search. Can you share that story and the impact that it had on you?
Sure. I'll tell you, this story is just so amazing to me because I think one of the things that is like all problems that we identify, they kind of start close to home or with something that seems kind of banal. So, in this case, this was, a little more than a decade ago, I'd say now, around 2009-10, I was in graduate school at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I was thinking about all of the kinds of many things I wanted to study and write about on the internet and how the internet was playing this huge role in our lives. And, I did a search on the keywords Black girls. And of course, I had done this various times, but it was particularly acute when I was thinking about it in the context of my daughter and her cousins, my nieces, and being confronted with just 80% of the first page of search results being pornography. For years, the first hit was hot black pussy or .com or sugaryblackpussy.com. And, thinking like, what does it mean when teenage girls or young children look for themselves on the internet? And this really was kind of the thread that I started pulling on that ultimately led to kind of a much larger study about the consequences of things like search engines in our societies. But more importantly, it also kind of underscored the tyranny of the majority, right? What does it mean when you're part of an ethnic group that's minoritized and you're a child within that group? Who has lost 100% of control over the way in which you're represented to the world. And I think these issues that stemmed from caring about, my daughter and my bonus daughter, I call her, and my nieces really was kind of like the opening for what's turned into a life's, worth of work about the role of these technology companies in our lives and in our society.
And what did you end up learning as you dug a little bit deeper from this singular Google search into Google search writ large, but also, algorithms and how those work in the sphere?
Yeah, well, this is the more interesting part to me of this story, is that when you did keyword searches on all kinds of things, not just Black girls, but of course that was near and dear to me because I'm a Black woman and I was a Black girl at one time, but Latina girls, Asian girls, and of course when you contrast that with other identities that, let's say, aren't typically marginalized in our society, you see such a differential. So of course, anytime you search for boys and men, you're not going to be confronted with pornography, right? Or this kind of sexual objectification. So that maps pretty clearly onto the way our society is organized. And you start to see varying levels of harm that are different that I do think map onto these, challenges that we've had that far predate the internet. So I was interested in how that was happening. And I was trying to, at the time, this is like 2009, 2010, I was trying to tell people, listen, it's it's coded in a way that's discriminatory. These platforms are encoded with racism. The logic is racist and sexist because it would allow for these kinds of false, misleading, misinformative kinds of results to come to the fore. Now, you have to remember 10 years ago when I would say something like that, people, these are world experts, professors, PhDs, would say, Safiya, that's just impossible because computer code can't discriminate. Computer code is just math, and math can't be racist, can't be sexist. That was the prevailing logic. So you know how far we've come in 10 years because now you can be anywhere and people are pretty astute about the discriminatory effects of computer code and software. And there are unfortunately thousands of examples now of harm that comes from algorithmic discrimination, right? I think of it as algorithmic oppression, but I can tell you that not so long ago, this was a very, very difficult concept to apprehend. And the way we've come to know about it, quite frankly, is because of the many women, people of color, LGBTQ scholars and journalists who have been documenting this and really pushing this into a mainstream issue. And so, I've been part of that community of people over the last 10 years.
I'm curious, Google search in particular has really succeeded in centering itself in our everyday habits. It is hard to imagine a day without looking something up on the map or searching, for, on Google search.
That's right.
And I'm curious, it's almost become like this point of reflex dependence where even though, as you mentioned, I think there is a lot more awareness about algorithmic discrimination in the macro sense, I still feel like we tell ourselves little bitty lies to make it okay to use these tools. And you touched on one, but I still think that they're, what did you say to people who said the algorithm is objective? It's free of all the biases that humans have. It's like the internet itself, it's democratic, open to all. It solves for everything. And not only that, but it's also just the majority of people, getting what they asked for. What is your response to that sort of reflex?
Yeah, that really is the prevailing logic in the public. I mean, I will tell you that we are also shifting how the public comes to see these things. So that is very important. And I feel like we still have a lot more work to do. But you are right. I mean, there's a couple things in there. So first, the companies themselves, Google, but not just Google, other companies too, are really invested in this idea that they are simply kind of the world's best technology, that they are not culpable or responsible when these kinds of, let's say, disparate impact of the technology, right, where there's harm that comes from their failures. They will argue that they're simply a reflection of society. They're just the mirror, right? If pornography is the main thing you get when you search for Latina girls or Asian girls in 2021, and mind you, this is without having to add the words sex or porn. They're just synonymous, right? This is the part of the real problem. They'll tell you, well, that's just because that's what everybody's looking for. Well, of course, now we have to say, well, is that what Latina girls themselves are looking for? Is that what Asian girls themselves are? Is that what children are looking for about themselves? I think not. So, of course, we have to ask ourselves, what is this about this kind of tyranny of the majority, if that is indeed the logic at play? Now, I spent a lot of time trying to unpack how search engines work with what is available and can be known, because, of course, all these technologies are proprietary. You can't see how the code works. You can only go from what Google says about how its product works and then looking, kind of reverse engineering back and seeing all of the kinds of, different ways that search results kind of come into existence and what they're saying, what they're actually
But we do know
reporting.
that it's an ad company and it makes a ton of money off, for example, the porn industry.
That's right. And that was one of the things that I spent so much time when I was writing the dissertation that eventually came the book, was showing that Google search is not an information or knowledge portal. It is an advertising company. Those that pay the most to optimize content are the most likely to be made visible. Now, this is really, really important. We know, for example, that Google always biases and defaults to its own interests. Now, how you see this is when you go to look for a video, you're always going to find YouTube at the top of the search pile. You're not going to find Vimeo or some
And
other
for those who
competitor.
don't know, Google bought YouTube.
That's right.
So under the same umbrella company.
That's right. Alphabet is kind of their parent company now. But yes, Google, kind of colloquially as we think of it, owns YouTube. And so, you have to ask yourself, like, if Google's always prioritizing what's, in its own business interest, its own products and services, right? Kind of its vertical and horizontal products, then you have to look at the engine that's driving search. Now, for a long time, people would say that there was this firewall between the ads that were served up kind of in the margin on Google search and what they called the organic, I'm putting organic in quoting fingers, the organic web results. But of course, if you understand how AdWords works, and how Google's, let's say, keyword planning tool works, where people can, again, pay in a live auction 24/7.
I mean,
that's
the
always
ACLU
running.
also does this for its own ends. Everybody does it who has.
Everybody's doing this,
Yeah.
right? Trying to get their own content, to the front. And those who have the most technical skill and the most capital, the most money, are the most likely to show up on the first page. Now, this is incredibly important because that means there is not an organic, vetted, curated, logic where we're just trying to get the thing that's the most reliable to the front page. No, the ad company is trying to get its clients, the people that pay it, okay, to get their content visible. And this is very important that we make this distinction that Google Search is an advertising company. It is not an information retrieval or knowledge company. Now, it might be good for some banal kinds of things. You're trying to, let's say you're American, you're trying to convert, our British measurement system to metric. Okay,
butter equations. That's
You're like, what is
my
a
go-to.
liter? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like,
what's a
how
stick?
many-
I can't.
Okay, so it's great for that kind of thing that's kind of banal. But the minute you start looking for something that's socially nuanced, which is quite frankly how a lot of people use search engines, well, now you're starting to fall apart. And this is why we have to look.
One example that you used in your book was professional hairstyles. That does not seem like something that should be at all gender-based, race-based, and yet can you tell us what popped up for that example that you used in your book?
Well, I appreciate that you remember that because, I put so many examples in the book to try to help people understand it's not like a one-off kind of experience, right? So, for many years, if you did a search on professional hairstyles for work, you would get almost exclusively in Google Images white women with ponytails and updos. And if you Googled unprofessional hairstyles for work, it was almost exclusively Black women with natural hair. So your listeners today, you can't see my hair, but I did wear my unprofessional hairstyle for you because I
really feel like taking my hair down.
I'm just like, solidarity. Listen, I always tell, whenever I'm giving a talk about this and I'm talking to white women, I say, now it's the ponytail and the updo that makes you professional. And I guess also being white. So, it's like this idea. And of course, think about how many teachers and parents are constantly telling students to Google it. Oh, just Google this, Google that, Google this career, Google that career. For years, if you look for professors, you'd never see, Black women or anyone who looked like me. So, you have to ask yourself, what is it about the subtle normalization of racist and sexist ideas that also come through when students think they're going to a fact checker or a truth-telling machine vis-a-vis a search engine.
And I also, you touched on something that I want to keep going into, which is that as these companies get bigger, as Google search starts to take over, we are losing investment in education, in the resources, in libraries that could kind of counteract and are meant to be information hubs and, slightly, maybe still problematic, but slightly less of an ulterior motive of just trying to make money.
Yeah.
And that seems like it's part of the problem here, is that it's not just these companies are taking over in a sort of marketplace. They are the only option in some circumstances.
Well, this is absolutely correct. And this has really been, even since the book has come out, I talk about this, like what's at stake in terms of our knowledge and information futures. And part of this, of course, I'm motivated because I come out of the field of library and information science, right? So this is like that I went to the iSchool, the information school at Illinois, and I have a PhD in library and information science. And of course, I think about what it means to make knowledge available for thousands of years, right? What will people know thousands of years or even, 50 years from now? So, of course, we frame these issues differently than, let's say, a computer science department who might be looking at these concerns. And I will tell you that if you think about what the tech sector has done, but Google in particular. Now, they've had some different kinds of projects. There was as I was entering grad school, there was this huge Google book digitization project underway. There was an amazing book written by Siva Vaidyanathan called The Googleization of Everything and Why We Should Worry that significantly influenced me. I was thinking about how we were just turning over these vast stores of human knowledge to a private advertising company, and the kind of race to digitization. So libraries were starting to stop buying books, starting to only buy digital copies. Of course, many of us were thinking, well, what happens when your power grid goes out, or you live in some part of the world where, your device becomes obsolete and you can't access it, these digital copies anymore.
Also, who's deciding what gets digitized? Is it all going to be like English-speaking, European?
Yes. This was actually the major issue around that project early on, was that, the French in particular, France was like, hold on, you are digitizing all of our, French kind of national cultural heritage, this American company. We don't know what you're doing with that, and these are our national treasures. So there became all these kinds of issues, and of course Google's position was it was digitizing all the world's knowledge, and of course what we mean is all the world's English-speaking knowledge, and there's a whole lot of knowledge that's not in English. So all these things are, of course, are really important, and simultaneously, just to answer your question, Molly, what's happening is we are living in a moment where we are defunding public education, defunding higher education, defunding libraries. Every kind of democratic institutional counterweight that is a public good is being subverted by the very industry that is not only kind of like squeezing out those institutions, but it is also not paying taxes, offshoring their profits, right? How can we have a tech sector, the biggest sector on the planet, that doesn't pay taxes, in some cases gets tax refunds? And those taxes are very important to bolstering democratic institutions like we're talking about, that are the kind of counterweights that we need so desperately. So it's very important that we kind of take a systems look at what's happening here. They create the conditions by failing these institutions, and then they rush in and provide the backbone and all of their services to bolster those organizations. And it's a profound concern.
Another piece of this that feels relevant is the sort of homage to the algorithm, but also that it's too complicated. It's too, it's above what I understand. The geniuses at Google understand this magic world, so it's not really up to me to question it, and I get it for free. So why am I, what do I have to complain about? What is the problem with that line of thinking? Which I completely think that before I read your book, and I should know better, but in my regular life, I'm like, I'm getting a service, and I don't know how these things work. Maybe it's just a glitch that they can fix and address. Where have I gone wrong?
Okay, so for sure, this has been the huge payoff of 50 years of the internet, and 2 decades of companies like Google and their predecessors. One of the things that I think is interesting for those of us who've been on the internet for a really long time, all right, I got my first email address, I think, in 1989. So you know that I'm not a spring chicken. And I will tell you that the whole idea of Web 1.0 was it was kind of disorganized and it was a little messy and, but there were trade-offs. For example, the kind of first version search engines were really virtual. They were kind of directories. We called them virtual libraries, in fact, and librarians and other subject matter experts really organized things. Now, what that did is it had a high degree of transparency. We knew who was giving us what, where it was coming from. There was context, there was specificity. There was like, here's a link to this. You can maybe get in here. And, I don't know that if this one's is reliable and those kinds of things. All right, now fast forward, we go into a Web 2.0 world of search where now we have like the clean white page. Nothing to see here, folks. Just trust us. There is this kind of discourse of algorithms and kind of finding things on the internet, being more magical, right? We erase the visibility of the people and the experts who were at play. And now we say that the math will somehow decide better than the people. And we have tons of decontextualized links. We have all kinds of things. I mean, I think of Jessie Daniels' early book, Cyber Racism, where she talks about, for years, if you did a search on the keyword Jews, you would get a whole page of Holocaust denial websites.
And the response was, if I'm remembering this correctly, I read this in your book, was just don't type Jew. Type Jews or Jewish, you'll get much better results. Jewish people.
Of course, so this is, again, this logic of like, you users did it wrong.
Right.
Not us company indexed white supremacists and anti-Semitic content and put that up as the representation of the word Jew. We're not responsible. It's your fault. So, I mean, this is why, I do this work, is to say that is an unacceptable posture
and
for
we're allowed
these
to question
companies.
it. And we are allowed to.
Yes.
Even as consumers, we have that right. Even if we aren't the porn industry paying for the advertising, we still have a right to a better way of doing this. One thing that I think is really important to talk about and that you covered in the book is that algorithmic discrimination and oppression that the harm is not theoretical. The harm is real. And one example you gave is of Dylan Roof, who murdered churchgoers in South Carolina. And I had not realized how, the sort of evolution of his thinking that brought him to that day. Can you explain that story and how it relates to algorithms?
Sure. So, Dylan Roof was a white nationalist who murdered, at the time that he had murdered these 9 African Americans worshiping at Mother AME Emmanuel Church. It was, at the time, one of the worst, most heinous racist hate crimes kind of, modern times. And within 24 hours, everyone who's online is trying to research this person, this man, to see what has he done and why has he done it. And, within 24 hours, someone on Twitter uncovers his manifesto, which is thelastRhodesian.com. Now, this is interesting, okay, because Dylan Roof at the time is 21, and I can tell you that not in his entire lifetime did Rhodesia exist, all right? So, he's already kind of getting oriented in this kind of white ethno-nationalist sensibility. So in his own words, in his blog, which was authenticated by the FBI, he talks about how he was trying to make sense of the news reporting of Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. Trayvon Martin has been murdered by George Zimmerman. The trial is ongoing, and the talk is like a fever pitch. Americans are completely divided. For context, to remember, white Americans are like, what's the problem? George Zimmerman, acted within his rights to murder Trayvon Martin. Black America, overwhelmingly, he should be convicted. This was a vicious, hate crime against a Black teenager. All right, so that's what's happening in the cultural milieu. And Dylan Roof says he's trying to figure out what's going on. Like, why is this in the story in the news all the time? So he, in his own words, he says he does a Google search on the phrase black on white crime. Now, one of the things we know is that black on white crime is like a racist red herring. This isn't a real thing. This is not a phenomenon. This is what white supremacists use as a way to kind of galvanize disinformation, racist propaganda. So he does this Google search, and then he says he discovers all of these vicious attacks on white Americans by Black people that are being hidden from him and being hidden from Americans. And from here, he goes further and he goes down a racist rabbit hole. And he says, I learned about the Jewish problem. I learned about all these murders of white people. And I learned that we're taught that we live in a melting pot. But in fact, white people's lives are at stake. Okay. And he says, I can say today that I am completely racially aware. All right. So he goes on this journey. Now, what's interesting is if you do a search on black on white crime, and of course I've written about this, the Southern Poverty Law Center has written about this, lots of journalists now have covered this story. And one of the things that, he didn't see was like FBI statistics that show that violent crime is an intra-racial phenomenon, right? So, we're familiar with the phrase black on black crime. That's an intra-racial, violence phenomenon. We're less familiar with the phrase white on white crime, but we should be, because white on white crime is actually how the majority of white people die at the hands of other white people. So I just invite listeners to either ditch the phrase black on black crime or embrace the phrase white on white crime, just so that we can have a little levity here on that. So this is really an important story because to me, the consequences of doing searches on things that are already known to be patently false or propagandistic don't get intervened upon. They don't get framed. He didn't get FBI statistics. He didn't get any, writings by Black studies professors, nothing.
Or the Southern Poverty Law Center,
or
who
even
does a lot of this work.
That's right. They weren't visible at the time. Now, what happens is when these stories break, what Google does is they take a book like mine or Siva's or anybody else. It's just like a big book of tickets. This is what you call when you work in an IT environment and you have a problem to fix. You open a ticket. This is the kind of way we characterize that. So, my book is like a big book of tickets, as are other people's books. And Google just goes through and tries to fix them as quickly as possible. Sometimes they offer an apology, sometimes they don't. Most times
and it's
they
like
don't.
Nothing to see here situation.
Nothing to see here.
All fixed.
It's a glitch. But when you start documenting in a systematic way, which is what I was trying to do for the book, you see that there's too many things for this to be called a glitch. It's actually a logic that's at play. And the logic is that those who are the most vulnerable, the most likely to be harmed, are also likely to be minoritized, except in the case of women who aren't in the minority. And that, until they raise a problem, there's nothing to worry about. And I think this gets really serious. When you look at like the 2016 presidential election, this was something I was really concerned about, because when you did, just days following the 2016 election, if you did a search on final election results, the very first hit on Google search took you to a disinformation site that reported out that Donald Trump had won the popular vote. Now, this is patently false. He did not win the popular vote. He won the Electoral College. Hillary Clinton had won the popular vote by more than 3 million votes. But see, we are living in a country where people will say they can't trust the media because it gives them factually incorrect information, because the news is saying Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but Google's telling them that Donald Trump won the popular vote. And this could be dozens, hundreds of different kinds of facts that are not facts, because these issues of optimization and the ability to manipulate these systems is so pervasive that it's no wonder people can't figure out which way is up.
And I think also I imagine that if you are younger and grew up with Google and grew up with getting information through digital forms, that it's very hard to discern what is a paid ad, what has been boosted, what is a genuine search result, and that has huge consequences for things like elections.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a professor at UCLA, and I can tell you that my students for at least 10 years have been saying, and the whole 10 years that I've been teaching have said, I could never write a paper for class without Google. And so, one of the things I try to do is I slow them down and I say, okay, listen, they can't vet the resources very well. Many of them have never spent any time in the library. They don't really know how to use the databases or, go and talk to a reference librarian. They really struggle with these kinds of things. Also because they're under a tremendous amount of financial pressure now to go to school, which is different than it was before. So, I try to say to them, I said, listen, if you think that Google is so reliable, why go to UCLA? Why get a degree? Why not just Google for the rest of your life? Just Google your way through life. And they're like horrified. And they're, Professor Noble, what are you doing? And I'm like, see how that doesn't make sense? Because there are some things like knowledge that are actually still contested. There are also certain things that we look at a variety of different ways. So that I could pick up anything. I could here in this case I'm holding up my glasses. I say, okay, here's a pair of glasses. From a chemistry point of view, how would we talk about this? Well, we talk about like the plastic compound. We talk about what kinds of plastics are easier to mold and which ones aren't, and with durability. Okay, if we talked about this in an art and design class, we'd say like these glasses are super fly, these clear, this is good, this is like on trend. All right, we would have like an artistic, or there's a certain amount of like space that we need to be able to see through for this to make sense. All right, if we talked about this in an environmental like sciences class, we might talk about, is this biodegradable, right? I mean, why can't we eat these glasses when we're done with them? Why do they go into a landfill, right? We would think in complex ways. And what I try to explain to them is you cannot think in complex ways with a search engine. That's why we get an education. That's why we learn how to think critically. This is why we study, topics from many points of view. This is what a good liberal arts education does. It gives you lots and lots of different kinds of classes and vantage points into the world we live in. And these are the kinds of things that are lost.
And I think part of the Google search reflex is that you're put into give me the answers, rather than like, what are the questions and how do I contextualize? I mean, I think, is this what you mean by algorithmic literacy? That we learn how to contextualize and we learn how to question and not just be in this passive mode, which it's such an easy place to be, and I understand it. Questioning's a lot of work. But
also knowing that there are many ways of knowing in the world. And I think this is a very, very important. We see with different sensibilities and we come to understand not everything can be understood in just like a text-based delivery. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't have art and music and other kinds of ways to kind of understand the world. So the search flattens for us our understanding of the world. And it also delivers to us in a very structured, hierarchical way. So one of the things you want to remember about search is that it's a rank order, which means in the context of most societies that, use its product, you hold up the foamy finger that says we're number one at the football game for a reason, because to be first matters. In our cultural context, no one holds up the finger that says we're number 1,399,000, right? So search rank order also means if it's on the first page or at the top, it's more reliable. We can trust it more. And that, I think, is also very, very dangerous because, again, so many things that are happening in search need context, need more information, need to be more fully understood. And also many things that show up on the first page or first are false. and this is just a fact. So we're or are driven by a profit motive, right? They might be clickbait. They might be things to get you to click on it because it's going to be more profitable than, let's say, the truth or the fact. So these things this is what we have at stake. And I will just say, to me, this is so much more important than social media. And I have many colleagues who study social media, and I watch social media and I write about it. But I think that social media is a place where people understand much more about the subjectivity. They know they're in a network of their friends and associates. It's very different when they're interfacing with a blank screen that all of a sudden populates, like you say, in a way that feels magical and feels reliable and trustworthy. And I think that means that there are different stakes at play with these kinds of products.
That's interesting. Just to clarify, though, when we're talking about algorithmic discrimination, we're not just talking about Google, right? I mean, This is a much larger problem. There was a case the ACLU dealt with in Detroit where a man was arrested in front of his small children because there was a facial recognition mismatch, and he's a black man, and it was a black face, and the computer could not tell the distinction between these faces, and the police arrested this man, and he was held in question, and his children were terrified, his wife was terrified, and they sort of were like, it was the facial recognition, it was not our fault.
That's a terrible story. And I'm especially heartbroken because, that man had a perfect attendance at work. This is like a guy with an incredible work ethic who's just, an amazing human being who was entrapped by a faulty facial recognition system that with your own eyes, you could see
the pictures were nothing alike. His name is Robert Williams, by the way. Yeah, nothing alike. Even in the really bad surveillance camera footage, you're just like, as a human, did you not look at this before you arrested Robert Williams? This doesn't make any sense.
No sense.
And this brings up what you were talking about questioning and not just relying it was the algorithm. It's not us. And this comes up with Google Maps in sort of tragic ways sometimes when people follow the path without questioning, I'm in a snowdrift, but Google Maps is telling me to be in a snowdrift, so I guess it's the right way.
Well, this is very serious because, what has happened is people have come to be acculturated into believing that the algorithm knows better than we do, right?
Yeah.
Now, this is really, again, what I'm talking about when we talk about what's at stake, the loss of human agency, that the police officers can't use their own eyeballs and trust them because it's so hard to believe that the algorithm or the software could be wrong. Now, that's extremely dangerous. It's very dangerous for us to believe that these systems are infallible and somehow our own eyes, our own senses are betraying us. All right, so that's, and of course they do sometimes, not to say that they don't. So that is, of course, really important. The lack of ability to question these systems in our lives is also, I think, kind of what you're getting at here, which is software and, predictive analytics, these kinds of systems, recommending systems, surveillance systems, they capture us all kind of in them. And then decisions are made, whether it's matching our faces or mismatching our faces, whether it's how well we paid attention, and whether the proctoring software that's on your laptop that's monitoring your kids right now in this era of Zoom school is accurately deciphering their intelligence, right, or not, their answers, the scores that follow us throughout our lives and just determine whether we get a mortgage, whether we can rent an apartment, get a job, the attributes that are assigned to the kinds of names we have, right? And I think here about LaTanya Sweeney, Dr. LaTanya Sweeney is an incredible Black woman, computer scientist at Harvard, who I just admire so much. She did this study on Black sounding names on the internet and how Black sounding names get associated with criminal background checks, including her own. Here she's a Harvard computer science professor and getting ascribed these, certain kinds of criminalistic qualities around her name because her name is Latanya. So, it's really important that we understand how much we are captured into systems every day. You said it, we're just acculturated to pick up that phone or on the, laptop or the iPads or the devices all the time. And then we are building these data profiles about ourselves that we don't know, that we can't intervene upon. Thousands of companies buying, selling, trading data about us. We've completely lost our ability to understand who we are in these systems. People think they're just going to shop for insurance. They don't know that they're being shopped, right, for predatory rates. So this kind of systemic discrimination we already have, redlining, all kinds of different, horrible public policies now get inscribed into these technologies, and they are more opaque. They're very hard to understand. You have no comparative data set. You don't know that you've just been given a higher insurance premium. Safiya got to pay more for insurance than Molly did because Safiya is Black and lives in a historically Black neighborhood, and maybe Molly doesn't. Maybe Molly, we know Molly's white, but maybe Molly lives in, Beverly Hills or in Brentwood or something in LA. So I think these things are very, very dangerous, and they extend far beyond just thinking about your own personal data privacy. We're talking about a remaking of the worst dimensions of society and remaking them in ways that are very, very difficult to undo, to apprehend, to legislate around, and sometimes even to talk about.
Dr. Noble, just so we don't end on a really depressing note, are there solutions?
You can't invite me if you don't want to be depressed. I know. This is so terrible.
Please give us something to hold on to, because Google, just to name it, and you mentioned this in your book, and the book came out in January 2018, I think. So maybe this is a little outdated, but there's been 2 years since. But Google has done things where they're like, let's train. If the problem is in algorithms and in the code, well, let's train more Black women to be in coding, and we'll give money to fund a school. It's a pipeline issue. Yeah. So Google has tried, and I think what you said is that that's not the solution. So what is the solution? And can Google be responsible for it, or does it have to be an outside government actor who's imposing regulations?
Well, I kind of was a little cheeky in the book when I said that Google, in response to these criticisms, gave a huge donation to Black Girls Code and moved them into their New York offices. And Black Girls Code is a worthy and deserving organization. Absolutely. So there's no question. I find it disingenuous to say the reason that we, malign Black women in our products is because little Black girls haven't learned how to code. I'm not buying that. Okay, you're not going to push it back on our community and say it's our fault that we don't know how to code, when in fact, people like Jessica Gwynn at USA Today, the tech editor, has done amazing stories about this incredibly diverse pipeline of Black and Latino and Indigenous and women computer scientists who are prepared to go into the workforce in Silicon Valley, but just don't get hired because they went to San Jose State instead of Stanford, right? So we can really spend time talking about the alleged lack of a pipeline, which is just patently false. I think that of course, we need a more diverse workforce. There's no question. We also need that diverse workforce to not just be people trained in the same ways of knowing as computer science departments have been organized for the last 50 years. We need people who have degrees, joint degrees. You need a bachelor's in computer science and a bachelor's in African American studies or Chicano Latino studies or LGBTQ gender studies, because or sociology, anything that's going to teach you something about society, and especially vulnerable people in that society, is going to be an asset. So I definitely say those should be combined degree programs. I tell my computer science students who take my classes all the time, you have no business designing technology for society and you know nothing about society. So, they're like, okay, Dr. Noble, but they also are like kind of traumatized that my class is the only class they've had in 4 years that's even had them like think a thought about these issues. So, they're grateful and I know they want more. I'll just say, I think that many of these issues are public policy issues, quite frankly. For me, the issue is like structural. It's that these companies cannot, skirt paying taxes and again, collapse democratic institutional counterweights, offshore their profits, hire a narrow and kind of what feels like a very discriminatory kind of workforce, design products and services that they just roll out on the public with no oversight. And then after all the harms, like, Robert's case, then after the damage is done, we say, oops, sorry, but there's no recourse, there's no damages. I mean, there has to be like a legal regime where people can appeal to their state attorney generals and sue for damages, and there has to be funds available for people. The ACLU, of course, being so incredibly important to us, to the public, because we need advocates and people who can take on class action lawsuits and represent poor people who don't have lawyers and these kinds of things. This is very, very important because
so that
those
the
are the
majority
people.
doesn't rule that there is recourse, because Google has no incentive to have recourse and to give a minority voice a voice. So it has to be something that's built into the system.
That's right. That's right. And here's the thing. Poor people and people of color who are tracked, predictive policing, all these like technologies that exist far beyond Google, but that might in fact interface with Google, we don't have the resources to take on these big tech companies. I mean, I'm a professor and I'm always worried I'm about to get silkwooted by one of these companies, for taking them on and criticizing them, as powerfully as I try to do. I will say, so much of our lives are kind of over-determined by the policies that govern the society in which we're born. My parents, born into segregation, that over-determined what their lives would be like, all right? How the world would be organized. So we have to figure out how we're gonna stop the total automation of so many dimensions of the human experience through software, through platforms, through predictive analytics, through surveillance systems. Those things have to actually get managed by lawmakers and regulatory agencies. And most of the pressure for that, just like civil rights movements around the world, come from people whose civil rights and human rights and sovereign rights are violated. So I think we're going to have to really apprehend the depth of the harms. And, we're just going to be walking into the first generation of people who try to run for public office. Think about all the teenage women, young girls who documented all their lives on social media and then try to run for Senate, right? All the ways in which these technologies will get weaponized against them to silence our participation in civic life. Think about the teachers. I wrote about the examples of these women in my book who, 75-year-old woman driving a bus, and somebody digitized a collection of magazines that she posed in provocatively in her 20s, and she's fired. I mean, for something that happened 50 years ago. Thinking about lesbians, who share intimate kinds of stories in their community, right, through zines, and then these zines get digitized, and now all of a sudden these women's lives, the closed community conversations get made available to millions of people. All these kinds of encroachments upon living a good quality of life are really at stake right now, and I think we've got to just do as much research as fast as we can. We've got to have the lawsuits. We've got to create the public policies and the awareness. And I will say that the thing that makes me so hopeful is that 10 years ago, people told me technology couldn't discriminate. And now we have this amazing podcast, this conversation. People can apprehend these conversations, and they're pissed and they want to do something about it. And that's fantastic.
Well, I'm definitely pissed. One last question for you is actually just a personal question I had, which is, did Google ever reach out to you? Did you ever hear from them after your book? Any explanation given to this larger systemic critique?
Well, I have spoken over the years to people who are ex-Googlers, I know that, okay, so the thing you want to know about Google is that most of their employees are really bound up in non-disclosure agreements.
Right,
So they
right.
really, really cannot talk. There's no one that can talk to you in the company or that's left the company. So that really wasn't an option to go and talk to them. I do know there are other ways that communication is happening. So I can see, for example, thousands of downloads of certain articles that I might put into a library, repository, to Mountain View. Okay, so, there's ways that I know that their employees are engaging with my work. I know that, again, I can go through my book and I can see all the things that they fixed that were in that book. So there is a relationship. There is no doubt about that. It is not the kind of formal relationship. What Google does as a company is they do respond to the public relations problems. They respond to a lot of the critics. They're trying hard to fly under the radar. I'm sure they really appreciate that Twitter and Facebook are taking all the heat, and a lot of eyes aren't on them right now. So they're aware. Their employees also have been walking out. They just organized and unionized Alphabet employees. So there's a lot of pressure in that place. And of course, the most egregious firing of Dr. Timnit Gebru, my colleague who's was their principal AI ethicist, who was, summarily fired by the leadership of Google when she pointed out that their natural language processing algorithm was racially discriminatory. And she was just fired a few weeks ago. And of course, we're all following, her situation with Google. So, they are not off the hook. They make a lot of terrible, terrible choices. And, it was easier to fire a Black woman than it was to take her advice, because her advice in saying we shouldn't have this racially discriminatory product in development was too valuable. Was more valuable to keep the discriminatory technology than it was to keep her. And so they fired her. And I think that tells us everything we need to know about their real engagement with these
and that
issues.
awareness is not the issue, that they had somebody internally who was telling them what was what, and it didn't matter. I mean, your starting point, they're an ad company.
They're an ad company, and they have an obligation to return value to shareholders. Some of this is like the way we develop financial policy that companies must adhere to, like that companies must return maximum value to shareholders at all costs.
I mean, that's
right?
why there's a Federal Reserve, because there's an awareness that banks will not on their own properly regulate and go after the best interests of all. Listen,
we had a mortgage crisis in this country that for the most part was enabled by the algorithmic gamification of the markets. That's just the simplest way I can put it. They used the kind of algorithms that we're talking about, right? This complex mathematical formulation to predict who they could, in essence, steal their property from. I mean, that's actually what happened. And betting against Americans, well, guess what? That mortgage crisis was the largest wipeout of Black wealth in the history of the United States. All the gains of Reconstruction, all the gains of the Civil Rights Movement vanished into thin air. They vanished into the offshore bank accounts of hedge fund millionaires and billionaires. And so this is sickening. This is criminal. When you think about all the ways that poor people and people of color who have been systematically discriminated against since the inception of this country, every time there are gains, whether it's the making and destroying of Black Wall Street, whether it's stealing land from people who were released from bondage after Reconstruction. I mean, so many are just outright all the kind of policies that exist now to take people's property. These things are really serious, and they're hard enough to apprehend when we know who the players are that are doing it. But we think about gamifying it through software. Well, now you're just like, you're nowhere. And I think for me, it's like, this is the stuff that keeps me up at night, thinking about the future of my kids and, my community and people around the world whose ability to cross a border is increasingly being determined by software, whose chances of going to college are being over-determined by, do they fit a model profile? And we know that these model profiles never include people who look like me. And so I worry about whether we're going to be pacified and distracted by all the fun apps, or whether we're going to get serious about understanding how harm works in the 21st century and where we're losing our civil and human rights. And so we have a lot of work to do. The one good thing I will say is that, we've had other major crises, human crises. I think about the transatlantic slave trade, it's Black History Month. I think about things like the transatlantic slave trade, the institution of enslavement and slavery in this country. It was really a handful of abolitionists relative to the millions of people who abolished those systems. So, I think to myself, millions of people don't have to understand, but a lot of key people need to understand and need to work together, and we need to erect policies, and we need to undo some of these processes and practices, and we can arrest these harms. I really believe we can.
Well, Dr. Noble, you've given us so much to think about, and thank you not just for what you said today, but for also asking these questions so early. Even when you got the response, algorithms are perfect, nothing to see here. It clearly has led to our conversation and to so many people being aware of this as an issue.
Yeah, well, I always try to tell people, listen to Black women, listen to women and people who, some people can see things just by virtue of their station in life, and I think that I'm really grateful to have the privilege of getting to do the kind of work that I do and getting to share it with you and, your listeners. And just thanks for making a space for the voices. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. To get more of these conversations, subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell, or subscribe to At Liberty wherever you get your podcasts.